The first time my neighbor told me a movie could wait, I was standing in a gravel parking lot holding 2 sodas I'd already spilled down the front of my own shoes, watching a dog I did not own eat half a hot dog I had not paid for. So no, this was not the smooth, cinematic part of anyone's life. This was a Tuesday. My name is Cole Bennett. I was 33 years old, a licensed electrician in a town small enough that the hardware store guy knew what I was building before I did. I could wire a whole house in the dark. I could stand on a ladder in a thunderstorm and not blink. I could trace a dead circuit through 40 years of somebody's bad decisions and find the one loose wire that started it all. What I could not do, what I had spent an entire year proving I could not do, was say 3 honest words to the woman who lived 12 feet across the driveway from me. Her name was June Hadley, and I am getting ahead of myself, which is exactly the kind of thing she would have teased me for. Let me back up. I bought my house because it was the ugliest one on the street, and I liked the challenge. It had knob and tube wiring older than my grandfather, a porch that sagged like it was tired of standing, and a kitchen the previous owner had painted the exact color of a bruise. Everyone at the open house wrinkled their noses. I looked at it and saw a project. I have always been better at loving things that need fixing than things that are already whole. I did not think about what that said about me until much later. June moved into the little blue rental next door about 3 weeks after I got my keys. I remember because I was up on the roof replacing flashing when a moving truck the size of a small country tried to reverse into a driveway built for a bicycle. And a woman got out and started directing the driver with the confidence of a person who had absolutely no idea what she was doing. "Left," she called. "Your other left." "No, my left." "Okay, we've established that neither of us has a left." The driver leaned out the window. "Lady, I've been doing this 20 years. And I've been alive 31, and I've never once seen a truck fit in that driveway. So I think experience is failing us both." I laughed out loud before I could stop myself. She looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun, and found me on the roof like it was the most normal place in the world for a stranger to be eavesdropping. "You could help," she called up. Instead of laughing, "I could," I agreed, and I climbed down. That was June. Within 4 minutes of meeting me, she had me carrying boxes labeled things like "kitchen fragile," "not fragile but still be nice," and one that just said "weird stuff," which turned out to be true. She had brown hair she kept shoving out of her face, a laugh that came out too loud and then embarrassed her, and a way of looking directly at you when you talked, like whatever you were saying was the only thing happening in the world. I noticed all of it. And then, being me, I locked it in a box in my chest, labeled it "not fragile but still be nice," and shoved it somewhere I wouldn't have to look. Because here's the thing you learn about wanting something you've decided you can't have. You don't stop wanting it, you just get very, very good at pretending the box is empty. For a year, June and I were neighbors in the specific, dangerous way that only people who live very close and keep very careful distance can be. I fixed her porch light. This became a recurring event, which should have told me something. The first time it flickered, I genuinely fixed it. Swapped the fixture, tightened the connections, done. The second time it went out, I told myself it was the wiring. The third time, standing on her porch at 9 at night with a screwdriver I didn't need, I understood I was inventing reasons to stand 12 feet closer to her. And I hated myself a little for it, and I did it anyway. "You're very handy," she said the third time, leaning in the doorway with a mug of tea, watching me pretend to work. "It's a bad light," I said. "It's a haunted light," she agreed solemnly. "Cursed." "You're doing the Lord's work, Cole." I carried her groceries. I jump-started her ancient hatchback more times than I can count. When she adopted a scruffy, one-eyed rescue mutt she inexplicably named Waffles, I built him a little ramp for the porch steps because his back legs were bad, and June stood in her doorway watching me hammer it together and got quiet in a way I didn't understand until much later. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "He's a good dog. He deserves a ramp. Cole." She said my name like it was a whole sentence. Then she shook her head, smiled, and went inside, and I told myself the tightness in my chest was just the cold. That was the shape of the whole year, if I'm honest. 1,000 small currents I refused to read. Let me give you a few, so you understand what I was doing to myself, because I don't think I understood it fully until I laid them all out later, like tools on a bench, and saw the pattern in them. There was the winter morning her hatchback wouldn't start, and I heard it grinding from my kitchen and was out the door with my jumper cables before I'd finished my coffee. Before I'd finished my thought, really, and she rolled the window down and said, "How do you always know?" And I said, "The engine sounds different when it's dying," which was true, and also not the reason. The reason was that I had, without ever admitting it, become a person who listened for the sound of her car in the mornings. That is not a thing a casual neighbor does. That is a thing a man does when he has organized his whole day, silently, around the hope of being useful to one specific person. There was the summer evening we both ended up in our respective backyards at the same time. Her weeding a garden she was terrible at, me pretending my gutters needed attention, and we talked over the fence for 2 hours until the mosquitoes drove us in. And I lay awake that night replaying the whole conversation like a man studying a map. And I could not for the life of me have told you what we'd talked about. Nothing. Everything. Her sister's wedding. A show she liked. Whether tomatoes were worth the trouble. It didn't matter. The content was never the point. The point was 2 hours, and the fence between us, and the fact that neither of us went inside until we absolutely had to. There was the night the power went out on the whole street during a storm, and I knocked on her door with a lantern and a look on my face like it was an emergency. When really, I'd been sitting in my own dark house, holding that lantern for 20 minutes working up the nerve to cross the driveway. She opened the door, and Waffles barreled out, and we ended up sitting on her floor by candlelight playing cards, while the storm threw itself against the windows, and at one point the lightning lit the whole room white, and I caught her looking at me, and she looked away fast, and I looked away faster, and we never spoke of it, and I thought about it for a month. You see what I was doing. I was collecting these moments like a man collecting evidence for a case he was too afraid to argue. Each one was a small brave thing that led me right up to the edge of a larger brave thing, and each time I stopped at the edge and told myself I was being respectful. I built a whole cathedral of near misses and called it friendship. Here's what I want you to understand, because it's the whole story, really. I never crossed a single line. I never said a word out of place. I was, by every visible measure, the perfect gentleman neighbor. And that perfection was the most cowardly thing I have ever done in my life. Because want does something specific to the body. Psychologists have a name for what I was doing. It's called emotional suppression, the deliberate inhibiting of an emotional response you've already had. And the cruel joke of it, the thing the research is very clear about, is that suppression doesn't reduce the feeling. It reduces your expression of the feeling, while the feeling itself keeps running underneath, using up everything you've got. You spend all your energy holding the door shut, and the thing behind the door just gets louder in the dark. Mine had gotten very loud. I told myself I had good reasons. I always had good reasons. That's the trap of being a competent man. You can build a rationalization as sturdy as a house. Reason 1. June had been through something. I didn't know what exactly, but you don't move alone into a small town at 31 with a rescue dog and a box labeled word stuff unless you're running from a shape you don't want to name. She had a way of going still sometimes, mid-sentence, like a song had come on that only she could hear. I figured the last thing she needed was the guy next door making things complicated. Reason 2, and this was the real one, dressed up as reason 1, I was afraid. Not of rejection, exactly. I was afraid of the after. Because if I said the thing and she didn't feel it back, I didn't lose a chance. I lost a neighbor. I lost the porch light, and the groceries and the ramp, and the sound of her laughing too loud, and then getting embarrassed about it. I lost the one warm window in an otherwise very quiet life. And I had decided, without ever letting myself decide it out loud, that half of June was safer than risking all of her. There was a third reason too, one I've only ever said out loud to June. And I'll tell you because you've come this far with me. My parents' marriage was a cold house. Not a violent one, nothing so dramatic. Just two people who had, somewhere along the way, decided it was safer to keep a careful distance than to risk the collision of actually needing each other. I grew up in a home where the thermostat was always exactly right and the temperature between people was always exactly wrong. And I learned, the way kids learn things before they have words for them, that the safest place to stand was slightly apart, close enough to help, far enough that no one could leave you because you'd never really arrived. I became an electrician, I think, because circuits made sense to me in a way people never did. A wire is either connected or it isn't. There's no almost. There's no fine and alone. Current flows or it doesn't, and when something's wrong you can find the exact break and close it, and the light comes on. I spent my whole adult life closing broken circuits in other people's houses because I would not, close the one in my own chest. The wire was right there. I knew exactly where the break was. I just kept my hands in my pockets and called it professionalism. So I kept my 12 feet of driveway. I called it respect. I called it giving her space. I called it being a good neighbor. I want to tell you now, before we get to the drive-in, what it actually was because I didn't understand it myself until that night. The distance I kept wasn't respect. It was fear, wearing respect's coat. And the two look almost exactly the same from the outside. That's what makes the coat dangerous. You can wear it for years and tell everyone, including yourself, that you're being kind, when really you're just being scared. Most people think the brave thing and the careful thing are opposites you can see coming. Look closer. The careful thing usually shows up wearing the brave thing's clothes. The night everything changed started with a knock. It was a Thursday in late September, that stretch of Oregon evening where the light goes gold and then blue and then gone, all in about 20 minutes. I was in my kitchen, still bruise-colored. I hadn't gotten to it yet, eating cereal for dinner like the bachelor cliché I was, when someone knocked on my door hard enough to rattle the glass. I opened it and June was standing there in a jacket she hadn't zipped, hair down, and something in her face I'd never seen before. Not sad exactly. Decided. Like a person standing at the edge of a high dive who has finally stopped looking down. "Take me somewhere," she said. "Anywhere. Right now. Before I lose my nerve." "June, are you okay?" "No," she said and laughed, and it cracked in the middle. "But I'm going to be. Get your keys, Cole. Please. Just don't ask me questions yet. I need to be moving." Every reasonable part of me wanted to ask the questions. What happened? Who hurt you? What do you need? But there was something in the way she said don't ask me yet that I understood in my bones. The way you understand a live wire not by touching it but by the hum in the air near it. Some things you cannot say sitting still. You can only say them while the world is moving past the window and the dark gives you somewhere to put your eyes. So I got my keys. "Where are we going?" she asked, climbing into my truck. "There's a drive-in outside town," I said. "The old one on Route 9. It shouldn't still be open. It's always still open. I don't understand the economics of it." "Perfect," she said. "Take me to the Impossible movie theater." Waffles, who had followed her out, put his one good eye on me through the window with an expression of profound betrayal. June rolled the window down and let him lick her hand. "He'll be fine," she said. "He judges everyone. It's how he shows love." "Runs in the household," I said, and she looked at me, sharp and surprised, and then she smiled, and I felt that smile go all the way down. The drive-in was exactly as I'd described it. Impossible, half-empty, gloriously out of time. A big peeling screen at the far end of a gravel lot, a snack shack with a hand-painted menu, and maybe a dozen cars scattered across the field like people who all wanted the same thing, and none of them wanted to be near each other while they had it. They were showing something old and black and white. I don't remember what. That's the honest truth. I could not tell you the name of the movie we did not watch. I bought 2 sodas at the spilled them immediately, and came back to the truck to find June had climbed into the bed of it. Sitting on the old moving blanket I kept back there, her back against the cab, looking up at the screen. There was a stray dog working the lot for hot dogs, and it had zeroed in on the one I'd bought and set on the tailgate, and it took the whole thing in one motion while I watched, helpless, sodas in both hands. June laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. "That," she said, "is the most Cole thing I have ever seen. You buy the whole meal and you feed the entire county." "He was faster than me," I said, defending the honor I did not have. "He was faster than everyone. That dog's a professional." She patted the blanket beside her. "Get up here. You're spilling more soda on the ground than you've got left." I climbed up. The metal was cold through the blanket. The screen flickered silver and blue across the field, across the windshields, across her face. There was a specific quality to the dark out there. Not empty, but full, the way a held breath is full. A drive-in is a strange invention when you think about it. Most people think it's about the film. Look closer. It's a dark box, open to the sky, built so 2 people can sit still, side by side with permission to be quiet together and pretend the quiet is about the movie. The movie is the excuse. It has always been the excuse. We watched the film we weren't watching for a while. Waffles the second, the professional, moved on to the next car. Somewhere a kid was crying and then wasn't. The air smelled like cut grass and popcorn grease and the specific cold of the first real night of autumn. For a while, neither of us said anything, and it was the good kind of nothing. The kind that only exists between 2 people who have spent a year building it board by board, without admitting they were building anything at all. I was aware of every inch of blanket between us. I was aware of the warmth coming off her side, even though we weren't touching. I was aware, in the way you're aware of weather, that something was about to happen, and that I had spent my whole life leaving rooms right before this exact moment. "Can I ask you something?" she said, still watching the silver screen. "And you have to actually answer, not do the Cole thing where you make a joke and change the subject." "I don't do that." "You absolutely do that. You've been doing it for a year. It's very charming and I'm on to you." I laughed, caught. "Okay, ask." She was quiet for a moment, gathering it. "Why'd you buy the ugliest house on the street?" It wasn't the question I expected. Everybody asks me that. I'm not everybody. Why? I looked at the screen so I wouldn't have to look at her. Because I'm good at things that need fixing. And I'm bad at things that are already whole. I don't. I stopped. This was closer to the truth than I usually let myself get, out loud, in the dark, 12 inches from her. I don't really know what to do with something that doesn't need me. So I find the broken thing and I make myself necessary to it, and then I get to stay. She turned to look at me then. I felt it more than saw it. That's the saddest thing you've ever said, she told me softly, and the most honest. You said actually answer. I did. A beat. I'm glad you did. And then June turned the radio down. The little speaker I'd hung on the window went quiet, and the movie kept flickering blue and silent across her face, and she said, not looking at me, can I tell you the thing now? Yeah, I said. My heart was doing something complicated. Yeah. Tell me the thing. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady in the way voices get when a person has decided that steadiness is the only thing keeping them upright. 2 years ago I was engaged, she said. His name was Marcus. We had a whole life planned. Rings, a date, a little house with a yellow door. I even knew the door was going to be yellow. That's how far in I was. She laughed, but there was no bottom to it. And 4 months before the wedding, he sat me down and told me he'd met someone else, that he'd been meeting her for a while, that he was sorry, but he'd rather hurt me now than lie to me forever, as if that was a gift he was giving me. I didn't say anything. I had learned from 100 houses full of 40 years of somebody's bad decisions that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stay very still and let the current run its course. So I did what you do, she went on. I gave back the ring. I moved. I found a town where nobody knew me as the woman who almost got married. I got a dog nobody else wanted because I understood him, and I promised myself, I swore that I was done. That I was not going to be the kind of person who hands her whole heart to somebody and stands there while they decide whether to keep it. I was going to be fine. Alone. Fine and alone. Those were going to be my 2 words. Fine and alone, I repeated quietly. Fine and alone. She finally turned to look at me, and the screen light caught the wet along her lashes. And then a man I'd never met climbed down off a roof to help a stranger fit a truck into a driveway. And he fixed a light that wasn't broken 4 separate times. And he built a ramp for a one-eyed dog because he deserved one. Her voice caught. And I have spent an entire year, Cole, telling myself you were just the neighbor, just the handy guy next door. Because if you were only that, then I was still safe. I was still fine and alone. But you're not just that. You haven't been just that for a very long time, and I'm so tired of pretending, and tonight I couldn't do it anymore, so I knocked on your door. I want to tell you I said something perfect. I want to tell you I had a speech, calm and adult, ready. What I actually said was, June, I fixed that light 4 times. It was never broken. She stared at me. It was never broken, I said again, and my voice came out rough. There was nothing wrong with your light. I checked it the first time. I fixed it the first time. Every time after that I was standing on your porch inventing a reason to be 12 feet closer to you because I was too much of a coward to just knock and say the thing, and I told myself it was respect. I told myself I was giving you space. I laughed and it hurt coming out. I've been giving you space for a year, June. I'm so good at giving people space I could give it professionally. It's the thing I'm best at, and it's the thing I hate most about myself. The frozen man white knuckles the wheel. The brave one lets go. I had been the frozen man for a year. For longer than a year, if I'm honest, for most of my life, and I was so tired of my own hands. I let go. I want you, I said. Not the handy version. Not the good neighbor version. Me. I've wanted you since you told a truck driver neither of you had a left. And I never said it because I decided half of you was safer than risking all of you. And June, that was the coward's math, and I'm done doing it. There are 2 kinds of people, I think. And that year I'd been the wrong one. There's the person who feels the pull towards someone and grips the wheel harder, knuckles white, telling themselves the grip is control, when really it's just fear with good posture. And there's the person who feels the same pull and lets go of the wheel and trusts that letting go isn't the same as crashing. For a year I'd been the gripper. June had knocked on my door because she was tired of gripping too. We were 2 white-knuckled people who'd each decided, on the same cold Thursday, to finally open our hands. And the miracle of it, the thing I still can't quite believe, is that we opened them toward each other. I don't want to be careful anymore, I said, and I could hear my own voice shaking and I let it shake. I don't want to fix your light. I don't want to be useful from a safe distance. I don't want to be the man who helps you carry things into a life I'm too scared to be part of. I want to be in the life, June. I want to be the mess and the risk and the whole heart, not the reliable guy next door who never asks for anything, because asking might cost him the 12 feet. The movie flickered. Somewhere the crying kid laughed. Waffles the professional had, I noticed distantly, come back and was sitting patiently by the tailgate, judging us both. June reached over. Her hand found mine on the cold metal of the truck bed. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just her fingers cold from the night sliding into mine and holding on. The movie can wait, she said. And she wasn't looking at the screen. She wasn't looking at the back seat. She was looking at me, and I understood that she had never once, this whole night, been talking about the movie. For a long moment we just sat there, hands joined, the film flickering silent across both our faces, the professional dog watching us with his one good eye like a very small and very judgmental chaperone. I could feel my own pulse in the place where her fingers pressed mine. You weren't supposed to say it back, she said finally, and her voice was thick. That was the whole plan. I was going to say my terrifying thing, and you were going to be kind about it, and I was going to survive the humiliation, and we'd never speak of it again, and I'd have at least been brave once. She laughed, wet and disbelieving. You weren't supposed to have been sitting on your own terrifying thing this whole time. That's not fair. I did all the emotional labor of driving over here. You knocked on the door, I said. I've been standing on the wrong side of it for a year. That's not nothing. No, she agreed softly. It's not nothing. Then she leaned her head against my shoulder, and I felt the whole tired weight of her year come to rest there, and I put my arm around her the way I'd wanted to since a moving truck couldn't fit in a driveway, and we watched the last of the movie we would never be able to name. When it ended and the screen went white and then black and the other cars started their engines and pulled away one by one, we stayed. We stayed until we were the last car in the lot, and the man at the snack shack flicked the big lights off. And even then we didn't want to leave, because leaving meant the night ending, and the night ending meant finding out whether the morning would still believe us. It did, but not without a fight, because June hadn't told me everything yet, and the part she'd left out was already, that very night, driving north toward us on a dark highway. I would love to tell you that was the end, that we drove home under the stars and lived happily, and the credits rolled on the film we still weren't watching. But love that shows up, after a year of careful distance, doesn't get to skip the hard part. It just gets to face it together instead of alone. And the hard part came 4 days later, in the shape of a text on June's phone that I watched drain the color out of her face. We were on my porch, my newly not Cordley porch, drinking coffee, waffles asleep across both our feet like a furry seatbelt, and June's phone buzzed. She glanced at it the way you glance at anything, and then she went very still. That mid-sentence stillness I'd seen 100 times, except this time I knew its name. June. She turned the phone face down on her knee. It's nothing. That's what people say when it's absolutely not nothing. She almost smiled. Almost. It's Marcus, she said. He texted. He says the thing with the other woman ended. He says he's been thinking about me. He says he made a mistake and he wants to talk. She set the coffee down carefully, like it had gotten heavy. He's driving up this weekend. He says he'll be here whether I answer or not. Something cold moved through my chest. Not jealousy, exactly. Fear. The old familiar coat, right there on the hook where I'd left it, still my size. Here is where the old me would have reached for it. Here is where the man who gives space professionally would have said something noble and terrible. You should hear him out. You have history. I don't want to stand in the way of that. I could feel the words forming, warm and self-sacrificing and absolutely poisonous. And I recognized them for what they were, because I had said versions of them to myself for a year. Giving her space. The coward's coat doesn't just fit one situation. It fits all of them. That's the whole problem. Most people think the hardest thing is fighting for someone. Look closer. The hardest thing is refusing to hand them a graceful excuse to leave. Refusing to be noble when noble is just fear that's learned to dress nicely. So I didn't reach for the coat. Okay, I said. So he's coming. What do you want? She looked up, startled. What? Not what does he want. Not what's the noble thing or the mature thing or the thing that makes the best story. What do you want, June? Because that's the only question in this whole situation that actually matters, and it's the one everybody, including you, is going to try to answer for you. Her eyes filled. I don't know, she said. That's the terrible thing. I thought I was so far past him. And then one text and I'm not scared he'll change my mind, Cole. I'm scared of the part of me that spent 2 years being fine and alone and made a whole identity out of it. He's not the danger. The girl who swore she'd never risk her whole heart again. She's the danger. He's just the door she'd walk back through. I understood that better than she knew. I had my own version of that girl. He wore a tool belt and fixed lights that weren't broken. The 3 days between that text and Saturday were the longest of my life. And I want to tell you about them, Because the movies always cut from the threat straight to the confrontation and skip the part that actually tests you, the waiting. The waiting is where you find out who you really are. The old me would have spent those 3 days managing, strategizing, figuring out what to say to Marcus, how to stand, how to win. I caught myself doing it the first night, lying awake rehearsing devastating things I could say to a man I'd never met. And I stopped, because I realized that treating him as an opponent to be beaten was just another way of making June a prize to be won, and she was not a prize. She was a person in the middle of the hardest decision of her year, and my job was not to win her. My job was to be someone she could actually choose freely, which meant I had to be willing to lose. That's the part nobody tells you about love that comes after a year of fear. To do it right, you have to hold the thing you were most afraid of, her leaving, in your open hand and not close your fist around it. I spent 3 days practicing opening my hand. It was the hardest work I've ever done, and I've rewired houses in July. June barely slept either. I know because our kitchen windows faced each other, and both our lights stayed on at 3 in the morning 2 nights running. The second night I texted her, "Can't sleep?" And she texted back, "The girl who was fine and alone is being very loud tonight." And I wrote, "Tell her I'm right across the driveway. 12 feet. Not going anywhere." And after a minute my phone lit up with just, "That's the problem. She's not used to anyone staying." "Then let me tell you what I want," I said when Saturday's shadow was almost on us, and the waiting had worn us both down to the truth. And you don't have to match it. You don't owe me a matching answer just because I said mine first, but I'm not going to make the mistake I made for a year. I'm not going to keep the thing in the box. I took her cold hand in both of mine. I want the yellow door. I don't care if it's this house or that one, or a house we haven't found yet. I want to be the person you hand your whole heart to, and I want you to know something Marcus never let you know. I am not deciding whether to keep it. That's not a question for me. I decided the day you told a truck driver neither of you had a left. There's no version of me that hands it back." She was crying now, openly, the way she laughed. Too much, and then embarrassed about it, wiping at her face with the heel of her hand. "You're not supposed to say it like that," she said. "That's not fair. You practiced." "I did not practice. I fix lights. I'm making this up as I go, and I'm terrified." "Good," she said, half a sob and half a laugh. "Be terrified with me." Marcus came on Saturday. I know because I was there. Not hovering. Not standing guard like a man who thinks a woman is a thing to be defended. June asked me to be there, asked plainly on her own porch with her own steady because decided to be voice, and I said yes, and I meant it. He was exactly what I expected, and it made me strangely sad rather than angry. A handsome, tired man in a nice jacket, holding flowers he clearly hadn't thought all the way through, standing in a driveway too small for the truck he'd arrived in, which felt like the universe making a point. "June," he said, "can we talk? Alone?" She looked at me. I did the hardest, easiest thing I have ever done. I stayed exactly where I was, and I said nothing, and I let it be entirely her choice. No coat, no noble exit. Just presence, which, it turns out, is a completely different thing from control. "You can say whatever you came to say right here," June told him. "Cole knows everything. There's nothing you can tell me that I need to hear in private." Marcus glanced at me, recalculating. "I made a mistake," he said, turning back to her. "The biggest mistake of my life. I've had a lot of time to think, and I know now what I threw away. I want to try again. I want the life we planned." And I watched June Hadley, who had built a whole self out of the words fine and alone, who had moved to a town where nobody knew her, who had adopted a dog nobody wanted because she understood being unwanted. I watched her stand up straight in her own doorway and stop being afraid of the girl inside her. "Here's the thing, Marcus," she said, and her voice didn't shake at all. "You didn't make a mistake. A mistake is a wrong turn. You made a choice. You sat me down 4 months before our wedding, and you chose someone else, and you called it a gift. And now she chose someone else, or it fell apart, or you got lonely. I don't actually need to know which, and you've driven all this way to make me your second choice a second time." She shook her head slowly. "I spent 2 years thinking the worst thing that ever happened to me was you leaving. It wasn't. The worst thing was that I let it convince me I was the kind of person who should never risk her whole heart again, and I almost believed it forever." She reached over without looking and found my hand, and then a man climbed off a roof. Marcus looked at our joined hands. Something in his face collapsed quietly, the way a building comes down when the one loose wire finally gives. "So no," June said gently now, because she was not a cruel person. She was just finally a free one. "I don't want the life we planned. I found a better one. It has a one-eyed dog and a bruise-colored kitchen and a man who fixes things that aren't broken just to stay close. Drive safe, Marcus. I hope you find your yellow door." It was never going to be mine. He left. The truck backed out of the too small driveway with much more skill than the original moving truck, which was, I thought, the only respectable thing he did all day. And then the driveway was just a driveway again, 12 feet of gravel. Except now there was no distance in it at all. We did not rush the life after. You don't build a house in a day, and you don't build a this in a day either. We built it board by board. There were hard days. I want to be honest about that, because the version of these stories where the confession fixes everything is a lie, and June would never forgive me for telling it. There were days when the girl who was fine and alone came back to visit, and June would go quiet and distant, and I'd feel the old panic reach for the old coat, and I'd have to remind myself, out loud sometimes, standing in my bruise-colored kitchen talking to no one, that her going quiet was not her leaving, that I could stay present without needing to fix her mood like a dead circuit, that some things in a person aren't broken, they're just healing, and healing has a sound, and the sound is silence, and you're allowed to sit inside it with someone without reaching for a screwdriver. There was one night about 2 months in when she pulled back hard, canceled dinner, didn't answer her phone, and I stood in my kitchen with 2 plates of food going cold and felt the entire year of fear come roaring back. Felt my hand actually reach for my keys to go do something noble and terrible like give her space. And instead, I did the hardest thing. I walked the 12 feet, and I knocked, and when she opened the door with her eyes red and her jaw set to send me away, I didn't ask what was wrong, and I didn't offer to fix it. I just said, I brought the plates. We don't have to talk. I'll just sit. And she stared at me for a long moment, and then she stepped back and let me in, and we ate cold pasta on her floor, with waffles between us, and didn't say a word for an hour. And around the time the streetlights came on, she reached over and took my hand, and that was the whole conversation, and it was enough. She told me later it was the first time in her life anyone had stayed in the room with her sadness without trying to manage it. I told her it was the first time in my life I'd trusted that staying could be enough. We were both learning the same thing from opposite ends. June kept her blue rental for a while, because she'd promised herself once that she'd never move for a man again, and I understood that the promise mattered even when the fear behind it was gone. So instead of her moving in, I did something better. I finally fixed my kitchen. I painted over the bruise, and I let her pick the color, and she picked a soft, warm yellow, and neither of us said anything about it, and both of us knew. I built Waffles a second ramp, for my porch this time, so he could judge us from both houses. By the following spring, June had let her lease go. Not because I asked. I'd learned not ask her to move for a man. I'd learned instead to build a life she'd want to move toward. She told me one morning over coffee, casual as anything, I gave notice on the blue house. And I said, yeah? Trying to keep my voice level and failing completely. And she said, the yellow kitchen's better. Don't make it weird. And I made it extremely weird. I picked her up off the floor. Waffles barked at both of us. It was the best morning of my life up to that point, and it kept getting outdone. I asked her to marry me on the porch. The not Cordley porch, the one where I used to fix a light that wasn't broken. I didn't do it with a speech, because June had heard enough of my speeches by then to tease me about all of them. I did it with a screwdriver. I told her the porch light had gone out again, which was a lie. I'd unscrewed the bulb myself an hour earlier, and when she came out to watch me fix it, like she had 100 times, I was down on one knee with the little box open, and I said, it was never broken. Not once. I just wanted a reason to be near you. I don't need a reason anymore. Marry me and I'll never invent one again. She cried the too much way and then got embarrassed about it, and then she said yes into my shoulder so I felt it more than heard it, which was somehow exactly right. Waffles, who was very old by then and judged everything, judged this too, and then licked both our faces, which from him was a standing ovation. We went back to that drive-in on the anniversary of the night she knocked. Same peeling screen, same impossible economics, same professional dog working the lot, older now and even more entitled. We climbed into the truck bed with the old moving blanket. I bought 2 sodas and, in a personal triumph, spilled only one. Halfway through the movie we weren't watching, June turned the radio down. Can I tell you the thing? She asked, and I heard the smile in it before I saw it. Yeah, I said. Tell me the thing. The movie can wait, she said. And this time we both laughed. And this time she was looking at me, and I was looking at her, and neither of us had ever, not once, been talking about the movie. So here's what I learned, and it took me 33 years and a haunted porch light to learn it. The distance you keep from someone you want, the space you're so proud of giving, go and look at it closely in good light. Sometimes it really is respect, but a lot of the time it's just fear, wearing a very convincing coat. And the terrible trick of that coat is that it lets you feel good about staying away. It lets you call cowardice kindness. It lets you fix a light that isn't broken for a year instead of knocking on the door and saying the true thing. The true thing is usually simple. It's usually 3 words or 1 look or the movie can wait. It's almost never as complicated as the year you spent avoiding it. I still fix things that aren't broken. June says it's my love language and she's not entirely wrong, but I don't hide behind them anymore. Now, when I'm on her porch with a screwdriver I don't need, she opens the door, and I put the screwdriver down and I say the true thing, whatever it is that day. Turns out that's all it ever was. A door 12 feet away, and the whole distance was just me, deciding I was too scared to cross it. I crossed it. Have you ever kept 12 feet of driveway between yourself and someone you wanted? A porch, a desk, a hallway? Some small safe distance you called by a kinder name than fear? What finally made you cross it? Or what's still stopping you tonight? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story found something in you, the door you haven't knocked on yet, the light you keep fixing so you don't have to say the real thing, do me a favor. Leave a like so it reaches the next person still standing in their own driveway. Subscribe. Because there's another story next week for anyone who's ever been fine and alone and secretly hoping someone would climb down off a roof. I'll see you in the next one.